Protests now in their 15th day. But rather than pursue and run the risk of bloody clashes unfolding before the eyes of the world, riot police withdrew. Will they be back? Or is Ukraine's embattled president charting a different course? Viktor Yanukovych, who stunned Brussels with his November 21st decision to back out of an EU partnership treaty and instead opt for closer ties with Moscow. He's now offering talks with the opposition, caught between Moscow's hard sell and tumbling markets that have the country's big conglomerates on credit watch. What are Yanukovych's options? With the EU foreign policy chief and a top State Department official both in Kiev right now, sympathizing, you can see here, with anti-Yanukovych protesters, and the rest of Eastern Europe watching very closely indeed. This certainly has the trimmings of a broader East v West showdown. Although, we'll also see why what's unfolding will not be a remake of the 2004 Orange Revolution. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking the question, is it a frozen stalemate in Kiev? And with us from the Ukrainian capital, correspondent Gulliver Cragg, who's been following this from the get-go. Also in Kiev, Rostislav Pavlenko, member of the Ukrainian parliament with Vitaly Klitschko's Ukrainian Democratic Alliance for Reform, UDAR. Thank you for being with us. Feminine activist Inna Shevchenko. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back as well to Celestine Bolin.
Thank you.
Contributor to the International New York Times. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, by the way, on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag is F24Debate. They moved in, they pulled out. They, of course, are the riot police in the capital of Ukraine. More from Clovis Kazali.
From inside Kiev City Hall, protesters spray icy water on security forces. 3 police buses had been parked outside the building all night, and thousands cheered as they left. At Independence Square on Wednesday morning, there were no longer signs of anti-riot police. After a night of tense standoff, one opposition leader, heavyweight boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, took to the stage.
The past night was interesting. I've never seen so many special forces, never in my life. This shows just how afraid of us the authorities are. They brought in all the special forces, all the special units of the Interior Ministry, and they sent them here, to the square, to disperse us.
Unlike in recent weeks, this time police appeared to be under orders to refrain from using excessive violence. But clashes did take place when anti-riot forces stormed the square, bringing down barricades and trying to make arrests. The move marked the biggest attempt yet to reclaim the streets occupied by opposition supporters. Despite sub-zero temperatures, protesters vowed to remain mobilized until Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych steps down.
When all Ukrainians come here, then we'll be able to topple our government. People all need to join, and then we may be able to win.
Meanwhile, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland visited Independence Square, where she handed out food both to the opposition and to the police. It came after the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry expressed Washington's disgust with the way authorities have handled the protests.
Victoria Nuland, and overnight, just before the riot police moved in, it was the EU's foreign policy chief, Catherine Ashton, who had gone and visited the protesters. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Gulliver Cragg, you heard in the Vitaly Klitschko, the boxing champion slash opposition leader there. What do you think are the reasons why the riot police eventually pulled out?
I think the main reason that they aren't using the kind of force that we have unfortunately been shown that they're capable of 10 days ago right now is not because they're worried so much about the opinion of visiting dignitaries such as Catherine Ashton, but much more because they're worried about the anger that it could provoke in the Ukrainian people. We saw in the early hours of the 30th of November, when police very, very violently broke up a demonstration on Independence Square. It was after that that Ukrainians flooded the streets, and this protest got much, much, much bigger. And it was obvious this morning, in broad daylight, the police on the streets were outnumbered by protesters. More and more people were coming to stand in front of the city hall and the other key places in solidarity with the protesters. And I think that they realized that it was not going to be able to happen this time without severe outrage from the Ukrainian people.
Not be able to happen this time. Rostislav Pavlenko, since then, the Prime Minister and the President have offered dialogue with the opposition. Will you be taking up that offer of dialogue?
To understand how sincere this offer is, because we've been seeing a lot of this. Actually, the opposition forces put forward the conditions to start the dialogue, which is to free everyone that was captured during the protests, put to justice those that actually are guilty of beating the people that your colleague mentioned, and dismiss the government that covered all this issue. That is why before starting some negotiations, we need some building of trust.
So you want to see a sign from the government, effectively, the liberation of those who've been arrested since the start of the protests. The more hard line, I would say, that the nationalist opposition calling it a farce and a comedy, the offer to dialogue. Is it a farce and a comedy?
Yesterday, Yanukovych personally promised that he will see to it people are set free, and then his subordinates invented some not to do this, and then happened what we saw on yesterday's night. So we saw words and we saw actions which unfortunately do not coincide.
Words and actions that don't coincide, in your view. Ina Shevchenko, you heard our correspondent there say how it was a measured response by the Ukrainian riot police compared to what we've seen in the past.
Exactly. What we can say right now that right now all the world observe how Ukrainian government and president, they are lost. They're definitely lost. They don't know what to do and what kind of tool to use to stop the protesters, but they still try. And what we see that, for example, last night, there were already more policemen and more special forces, but there were also more protesters. So they had to leave the administration, the city hall, and they don't know what else they can use to stop people. So right now, I think, again, as last time we were discussing, I said that this demonstration is not a demonstration, it is a revolution. Right now we are watching, and all the world is watching, that this revolution is showing that Ukraine is not a country of few gangsters that are in the parliament and in president administration. But right now we can observe that Ukraine is a country of finally politically active people, thousands of people that are coming in the street and demanding something. But also on the other hand, I see what's happening is that protesters somehow they don't know for what they're standing for so long. Because opposition is talking about, for example, impeachment. That is not possible in Ukraine because we don't have law about that right now. And not many people know about that. But opposition from the stage, they're talking for that. But this is just not real. This is practically not real. So some people, protesters, they're just lost. They're waiting for someone to lead them. And this is also the problem of this revolution, that we cannot see a strong opposition that could really lead the situation. So
now, when you heard Rostislav Pavlenko say, show us a sign of goodwill, free the people that are in prison, and maybe, yes, let's have dialogue. Do you agree with
No,
that?
if you follow the news, they are freeing today. The few activists, they were free. Those activists that were arrested, they are free today. So, but this is not a sign of trust. What I think that right now, it's just impossible to leave Maidan for people. It's impossible to stop it. It's not allowed.
And should there be dialogue with the president?
People cannot leave there.
Should there be dialogue
I think
with the
that
president?
the president has definitely, by law, it's not possible to, for him, like as they scream for impeachment, it's not possible. I think that Yanukovych, I refuse to call him president, Yanukovych has to pay for the fact that he's going to stay until election in 2015. And the payment will be that he, as an emergency, he has to sign the EU agreement. And this will be the payment for him to finish his presidential term.
But should there be dialogue between the opposition?
Well, without dialogue, it's not possible. Opposition has to meet and to give him exact demands. And this is something that is not done right now, clearly.
I mean, I think, something has to give, obviously. I mean, it's hard to see. I mean, maybe you're right. People will never leave. But actually, people eventually leave. It'll stay cold. It'll stay difficult. And I think, it's the one very obvious possible outcome is early elections. And I don't see why that isn't somehow the most realistic card on the table. I'm not in either camp, or I'm not hearing what the strategies are, but it would seem to me, first of all, it's true that people are in the street, but I would not say it's a revolution, since there's a whole, 46 million Ukrainians, and they're not all on the street. So you have to kind of give a chance for democracy to work in the way that we know it to work best, which is through a vote. So, I mean, I think, any outcome that's forced from the street is not, it's good for dialogue, but it's not good for a change of political power.
All right, so the perhaps early elections you think might be a solution. I want to pick up on what you just said about not everybody being in the street. Gulliver Cragg, there was a former interior minister who's with the opposition in Ukraine saying today, basically, only some units remain at the service of the regime. Point of fact, how many people still support Viktor Yanukovych?
I was sent yesterday or the day before a survey that was presented to me as being independent, but that was done by the European Centre for a Modern Ukraine, which is a think tank which I think tends to be rather more pro-government, promoting the Yanukovych government, its stated aim to pursue the European integration. Whether you believe that or not is a different matter. Anyway, this poll that they sent, even they showed something like half of all Ukrainians saying that they supported the protest movement, then around 43% saying they didn't support it, and the rest undecided. So you see, you've got a division in Ukraine. But I would imagine that the real figures, probably if you had somebody who was an anti-government think tank, asking the questions a little bit differently, you'd be able to get bigger results in terms of the amount of people who are supporting this protest movement. So my feeling is that a clear majority, but not necessarily a vast majority of Ukrainians support the protest movement. And we know Viktor Yanukovych's popularity was hovering around the 20% mark. Even in the east and south of the country, people aren't that keen on him anymore. They don't believe that he's the solution to the problems caused by the Orange Revolution team, Viktor Yushchenko and Yulia Tymoshenko, as perhaps many of them did before Yanukovych was elected president in 2010. But that doesn't mean that these people who aren't very keen on Yanukovych want to see the leaders of the current opposition in power at all. In fact, I think they might still continue to think that they're the worst of the two evils. And as Inna Shevchenko was saying, I think that a lot of people, even now protesting on the streets of Kiev, who are absolutely behind this movement, are not very happy with its leadership, or at least its mainstream leadership in the form of the three political parties who are sort of taking the lead here, the parliamentary opposition, if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I was going to sort of basically say the same thing you just said, which is that, yes, maybe the polls would show a real poll, serious poll might show 60% in favor, but in favor of what? At a certain point, we're beginning to lose, what the actual goals here, or what the possible way out of the situation is. And so, I think the for and against becomes kind of
All right,
irrelevant.
let's put that to Rostislav Pavlenko then. We have a stalemate situation. You heard Ines Shevchenko say that she wants to see Yanukovych go, but that you need to be able to sit down at a table with someone at some point to spell out these demands. What do you say to that? When is the right time to sit down at the table again?
Look, Ukraine has a rich history of political compromises set through the early elections. We had crisis 1993, 1994, which was resolved by early elections. The origin in a rerun of the presidential election, and in 2007, the political crisis was also resolved through early election. That is why what we can discuss with the authorities is actually how the elections of president, possibly the parliament. And this will actually be a sort of a referendum on how people understand whether Yanukovych is leading the country in the right direction, which he came, and justifies his turn out of Europe, or that people dislike it and want him to go.
All right, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because, Rostislav, because the telephone line is breaking up a bit. But there again, you're also endorsing that idea. Early elections, it sounds like from what he's saying that perhaps negotiations are about that at this point.
Well, I think that if they will go to discussion, like as Yanukovych already proposed, anyway, of course, we don't have to expect a lot. I think it's a bad luck to expect a lot from politicians anyway. So, especially in such a situation in Ukraine, I think if they will sit around the table and will start to discuss and will start to spell their demands, this will be already the first step. But we can see right now that Yanukovych is not the guy who would follow, who would agree on any sort of demands of opposition. What he's trying to do is he's trying to just to clean Maidan somehow. First, they were waiting when people will leave, when people will freeze and they will be tired and they will leave. They are not leaving. They are coming more and more and more. And even policemen are taking off their uniforms and joining them right now. Maybe not many people know about that. Those guys from special services who were beating people during Bloody Night, they are giving interview and they are saying that they had a kind of a demand from main guys who said that they will have to protect students from nationalists. This is the way how they are forcing people for all those clashes.
So you're saying it's not a stalemate, the tide is turning. We're going to have to take a quick break.
Yeah.
We'll pick up on this. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate.